Hello, it's Shari here today. I recently returned from a family camping trip and it always inspires me to create a camping themed card. So that is what I'm going to do in today's video. I'm going to be using the Love You S'mores set, which is one of my absolute favorite sets. I love the little bear and the squirrel and all the camping images as well as the sentiments. And I'm going to pair that with the Upon a Star set and use the constellations for my sky. So the first thing I need to do is to plan out where I want everything. So I'm just going to place the little critters at the bottom in the fire as placeholders so that I can figure out where I want to put my star constellations, and I'm also using the moon from the Love You S'mores set. I'm trying to make it to where they kind of go off the side of the page so that you know the sky is much bigger than this little card can hold. I'm going to be using my Misty tool to stamp all of these at once, so that's why I'm laying them out where I want them right now. Once I have them where I want them, I can place the cardstock in my Misty tool. And since that one was hanging off the side, I just decided, since it's a little one, that I was going to have it just completely on the card. So I picked up the stamps and now I'm using the powder tool so that my embossing powder won't stick to anywhere but where my ink is. The really fun thing about this card is instead of just using clear or white embossing powder, I'm going to use this really cool glow-in-the-dark embossing powder. So I'm going to turn my light off here so you can see how it glows. Very cool. So I'm using some Versamark ink because it's a clear sticky ink that's great for embossing. And I'm just going to stamp those constellations down and put that embossing powder on there. Now I actually did 2 coats of embossing powder, and you'll see that I'm going to stamp these again right on top of them after I've heated this up. So I'm heating up that first layer of embossing powder, and the reason I did this is because the embossing powder did not end up as thick as I wanted it to be. So my little stars might be a little more chunky than they would if I just did it once, but I'm going to do a second layer here, and the Misty tool makes it line up perfectly from where it was before. So now that I've got my second layer of embossing powder on, I can start to color my sky with distress inks here. So I've got some Wilted Violet and some Blueprint Sketch, and that's going to be the majority of my sky. And I'm just going to make some purple areas. There's no rhyme or reason to this, but instead of doing like a gradient, which I do often, this is more kind of just blobs of color. 3 is kind of the magical number when I do this too, at least 3 little blobs of color. Odd numbers are always better. Once I have those purple areas established on there, I'm going to go in with the Blueprint Sketch and start to fill in around them. And then when I get to the areas where the 2 colors touch, I'll kind of go back and forth between the 2 colors so that they blend together nicely. You can see that that embossing powder resists the ink, and so those stars are going to shine through very nicely. Now I had thought about masking off the moon so that it didn't turn blue or purple like the sky, and honestly I actually forgot. But you're going to see here in a little bit how I fixed that mistake, and I actually like the solution I came up with much more than I would have if I just masked it and left it white or colored it yellow. So once I get all my Blueprint Sketch and my Wilted Violet where I want it, I'm just going to go in with Chipped Sapphire, which is a very dark blue, and just do the edges. So I'm not going to cover up the work that I've done. I'm just going to darken the edges and define them a little more. I'm not going to worry about the bottom because I'm going to cover that up with some grass here in a little bit. So I've got some starry metallic watercolors here. And I'm using this gold one here. I've added some water, and I'm actually going to go in with a bigger brush to do some little splatters. So I'm going to get a lot of that paint on there. I really like doing splatters with this gold paint because it's nice and opaque. And in this case, it really looks like tiny little stars in the background. And then I'm going to go in with a smaller brush, and this is where I fixed my mistake with the moon. So I ended up painting it in because this gold paint is going to cover up what's behind it really well because it's nice and opaque, and I really love the way this turned out, probably a lot more than I would have if I'd colored it with distress ink and made it yellow. I just like the way this really shines. So now to work on my images, and I'm going to color these with Copic markers. So I'm using some Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink, and I'm just going to stamp out my two little critters. Now you can stack the fire. There's a die to cut out all three little pieces, but I wanted to keep it a little more simple, so I just stamped all three on top of each other. Then I decided I really needed to stamp the log on the bottom and the little s'more stick with the walnut ink. And then I'm actually going to go back and stamp out a couple of the marshmallows. I actually only ended up using one, but I wasn't sure if two would fit on the stick or not. So I'm going in with my Copic markers, and I believe these are E70s, which I think is a really cool kind of taupey brown, which is nice when you're trying to have a bunch of brown critters, but you want them to be different tones. I really like these colors because it's kind of a grayish taupey brown. So I'm coloring the squirrel with the E70s here, and I'm just doing very simple shading. So I went in with my lighter color, colored some shaded spots with my darker, and now I'm just blending it out with the lighter one again. I'm going to do the same sort of coloring method with my bear here. So I'm going in with my lighter color, and I'm not coloring his muzzle because I'm going to make that one different. I'm going to make that a really pale brown, more of a tan color, creamy color. And then I'm going to go in where I think the shadows should be. Just add a little bit of that darker marker. And just start to blend that out. I find sometimes I'm pretty heavy-handed in my coloring, so I've been trying to not color quite as much because I have had problems lately with it having so much ink it's bled out the side of the image and kind of ruined my image. So I've been trying to do just one more layer of color over everything and not color too much. Now here's that light color. I'm going to also use it to color my marshmallows. So I just barely put some on the edges so it looks a little toasty because I don't like my marshmallows burnt. And then I'm going to color the fire using a yellow, an orange, and a red. And I thought I would just color these as solid colors, but then I decided I wanted to do a little blending on it as well. And so what I actually did was the orange that I thought would be the center part. I'm coloring it in the center flame here. I actually did a little outline of it right inside my yellow part and then blended that back out with the yellow. And I thought it gave it a little more interest than just three solid colors. I'm going to do the same method with the red in the center. I'm going to trace around that center flame image there into the orange a little bit and then blend it out. And then I'll go back with the red just for the middle. I didn't do any blending in the middle because that red was pretty dark. I used the coordinating dies to cut out all my little images here, and I'm going to go ahead and put the fire on the logs here with some liquid glue just to tack it down and keep those two pieces together. Now for the bottom, I cut some noble fir cardstock with a grassy border die, but it's a little too bright for a nighttime scene in my opinion. So I'm going in with some pine needles distress ink and adding a little ink to it to darken it up a little. It's more like night. I actually thought it maybe needed to be a little bit more darker, so I got the forest moss and went over the very top edges again. So now it's time to assemble the card. So I'm using some strong adhesive here. This is the Tombow Extreme to hold my panel onto my card base. I'm going to get it lined up perfectly here. And you can see I have a little bit of white at the bottom, which is going to be fine because I'm going to cover it up with that grass. So I'm going to go ahead and put that grass down. And then to put my little fire on here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use some of this thin foam squares from Scrapbook Adhesives. These are half the thickness of their normal ones. And I'm just putting on the top of the fire, and this is the part that's going to be adhered to where the sky is. And then I'm going to use the liquid glue for where the logs are. Because where the logs are, we've basically got two thicknesses of paper, and where the fire is, we've got a space where those two thicknesses of paper are. So this makes it lay a little flatter. Then I'm going to use the thicker foam squares for the bear and the squirrel. I went ahead and I glued the marshmallow onto the stick, and then I've glued the stick into his hand behind, and I've added that foam adhesive to the back of all those pieces. And now I'm going to go in with a little bit of stickles just to make that fire sparkle a little bit. So I've got some red stickles, some orange, and some yellow, and I'm just putting them on the bottom of the flames. I'm not covering everything. Now, to finish it off, I thought about putting the sentiment along the bottom, but then I thought that might crowd things a little too much, so I decided to go ahead and put it on the inside. So I'm just lining up my sentiment the way I want it to look, that says everything is s'more fun with you, and I'm going to use some black licorice ink. Get that inked up really well, and then I'm just going to stamp that on the inside. And there's the finished card. So I'm just sticking it under my lamp so I can charge up that glow in the dark, and I want you to see how cool it looks. Isn't that cool? I think that's so fun. So here is the finished card. And here's a closer look. And then here's the glow in the dark. Thanks for watching. Have an amazing day. Bye.